As some of you may know, there's a famous lighthouse perched on the tip of a certain peninsula that's known as Portland Bill. The red and white striped spire that bears the name has been warning mariners away from jagged rocks and other such submerged dangers since 1906. Unfortunately, though, it offers no warning of another danger that lies closer by, one that has stalked the isle since before the Romans came here to quarry the island's stone. Around half a mile northeast of the Bill, there lies a system of caverns that's today known as Cave Hole. This network of caverns and tunnels is famous today for the dramatic torrents of water that shoot up from its rooftop blowhole in stormy weather. But for those who inhabit the isle, it's notorious for another reason altogether. You see, while it may presently be known to all us Kimberlands and other such outsiders as Cave Hole, all true islanders still know it as Keeve's Hole. Jonathon Keeve was a local man who was born around 1750 or so. His widowed mother raised him in the Portland town of Weston, but as soon as he could, he caught a ship and left to seek his fortune upon the seven seas. These fortunes, however, proved to be elusive, and he returned penniless and ragged a full 15 years after his departure. Despite his destitution, our Mr. Keeve fancied himself a cut above those that raised him, and told all who would listen that before long he'd have all the wealth and finery befitting a fine gentleman of his talents. Most who heard this scoffed and walked away, but to his credit, Jonathon made good on his word, and after a year and a bit had established himself as a free trader of fine goods. You see, back in them days, Parliament had chosen to replace the funds the nation had squandered in the recent wars with France and the American colonies by imposing fearsome taxes on a range of luxuries that many found they could not live without. So, those who knew of ways to avoid the paying of duty and the excise men that enforced it soon turned this prohibition into an enterprise. Given its preponderance of coastline and the many caves and isolated coves that dotted its shores, free trading ran rampant along the Dorset coast, and Portland was no exception. So, when our Jonathon began searching for a new spot to land his goods, he found that all the best spots had already been claimed, except, of course, for the caves I described at the beginning of this story. Their availability seemed a fact much too good to be true, and so piqued Jonathon's curiosity. Consequently, he began asking the weathered old men who frequented Portland's grey stone pubs if they had any explanation they could offer. One after another, they listened politely before shaking their heads, walking away and offering just one piece of advice. "You'd best just leave he alone, lad." Eventually, though, he found a man who remained thirsty despite exhausting his funds, and consented to tell him on the condition that Keeve kept his tankard full. "See here, lad," he said, his rough, calloused hands gripping the pewter vessel tightly. "They be afeard of the Roy Dog. That cave you've been asking after is where the bugger lives. I never seen it myself, mind, but about 40-odd year back me brother and a mate of his named Robert went up fishing near the cave. They'd meant to only stay an hour or so and be back before supper, but they got to chatting and larking about like little uns does, and afore long the night were upon 'em. They knew they had to rush back or else they'd get a tanning, so they start packing up, and suddenly right in front of them was a girt black dog twice the size of a man, snarling and snapping at 'em. They knew it weren't no earthly creature, 'cause its eyes were mismatched, one red, t'other green, burning brighter than the moon, and deep in its mane, tangled up in that shaggy black hair, were hundreds of human eyes, all desperate and blinking. Me brother had the right idea. He dropped all he were holding and ran without looking back. Robert, though, he were frozen to the spot. I can't tell you exactly what befell him, but they heard the screams right over t'other side of the bay. Take my word for it, son, that cave's not worth bothering with. You'd best just leave he alone." Now, upon hearing a tale like this, many a man would have chosen another location for his enterprise, but not our Mr. Keeve. As I said before, he thought himself to be a little better than those that surrounded him, and declared he'd not be scared off by the prattlings of drunken old men. Instead, he saw the superstition as an opportunity, and on the first night he landed goods in the cave, he presented his crew with a plan. First, he handed the largest of them a moth-eaten old bearskin, Then he handed the two tallest a lantern each, one covered in red stained glass and the other with green. Finally, he handed the two shortest a pair of torches made from green unseasoned wood. "Here's what we shall do," he said. "We'll load up the cart with as many kegs as it will take, and we'll pull it behind us with the lanterns held high and the bearskin over our shoulder as we wave these torches and let the wood smoke billow around us. All the locals and the excisemen shall be so afeard of the beast, we'll be left to conduct our business in peace." It was a good plan, and one that worked well. For months, rumours of the Roy Dog filled the isle, causing all the townsfolk to lock their doors and stay safely sequestered within their homes, allowing John Keeve and his crew to transport their goods down to Chesil Beach, and from there into the homes of eager paying customers. All in all, the ruse netted him a tidy profit and gave him good reason to gloat. That was, of course, until one night when he was left alone in the cave to take stock of his goods and count his coin. You see, there are few things that spirits like less than another taking credit for their deeds, and in due time, they always make sure to make matters right. At first, he didn't see the eyes, and when he did, he told himself he must have just left some embers glowing in the lanterns. After that, it took him a while to hear the snarling over the crashing of the waves, and to smell the musty smoke that enveloped the creature as it padded quietly around to him. However, by the time he was able to quell the terror that seized him, and the revulsion invoked by the sight of 100 pleading eyeballs twisted up in its fetid mats of fur, it was already far too late. We can't be sure of exactly what was done to him, but whatever it was, it must have been terrible indeed, for it's a well-known fact that he screamed hard enough and long enough to be heard as far away as Osmington. After that night, it took a few days for his body to come ashore. Only a few brave souls saw it, mind, as upon its discovery it was given the quickest of cremations. His face, you see. His face was an unbridled horror twisted into a frozen grimace, one that was only enhanced by the sallowness of his flesh and the emptiness of his eye sockets. A face like that must have seen hell itself, and couldn't be allowed to pollute this earthly realm. So, you listen close. Should you ever choose to visit Portland Bill, you take your time to enjoy the views that abound. Take your pictures of Pulpit Rock, and be sure to enjoy a picnic on the grass. However, whatever you do, make sure you stay away from Keeve's Hole at night, especially when the winds are up and the storms are brewing. The last thing you want is for the Roy Dog to leave its lair.